You think you understand Gen Z, you've seen the memes, you've heard the takes. They're lazy. They're obsessed with their phones. They can't handle real life. But here's what nobody's actually saying. Gen Z might be the most psychologically complex generation ever studied, and almost everyone is getting them completely wrong. Generation Z, born roughly between 1997 and 2012. They're your youngest co-workers who seem unbothered about everything, but somehow know exactly what's going on. Your teenagers who can detect a fake from a mile away, the people who grew up with the entire world in their pocket and still report feeling more alone than any generation before them. And here's what nobody tells you. The very thing everyone mocks them for, their relationship with technology, is actually the least interesting thing about their psychology. Gen Z are the first true digital natives. But there's a difference between growing up with technology and growing up inside it. Picture this. It's 2010, you're 9 years old, you don't remember a world without a touchscreen. The internet isn't a place you go to. It's the air you breathe. Your friendships live there. Your identity gets built there. Your bullies follow you there into your bedroom at midnight, with nowhere to escape. Previous generations could leave school and leave their problems behind. Gen Z never got that off switch. A 2019 study published in JAMA Pediatrics found that adolescents who spent more than 3 hours daily on social media showed significantly higher rates of internalizing problems, like anxiety and depression. But here's what that statistic misses entirely. Gen Z didn't choose that environment. They were born into it. You wouldn't blame a fish for being shaped by water, and the water they were born into was turbulent from day one. The oldest Gen Z were in elementary school during 9/11s, watched adults panic in real time. They grew up in the shadow of the war on terror, normalized airport security, color-coded threat levels on the evening news. Before they were old enough to drive, they already knew the world was fragile, and that adults didn't always have answers. Then 2008 hit. They watched their parents lose jobs, lose homes, lose certainty. Some of them moved houses. Some watched families fracture under financial pressure. All of them absorbed a lesson that Gen X had also learned one generation earlier. Stability is an illusion, and the system does not protect you. Psychologists call this vicarious trauma, absorbing the stress and fear of adults around you, even when you're not directly affected. Gen Z experienced it on a scale unprecedented in modern history, and it fundamentally rewired how they relate to institutions, authority, and the future. Which brings us to their most defining psychological trait: radical skepticism. Gen Z doesn't trust corporations. They don't trust politicians. They don't trust media. But crucially, they don't perform that distrust the way previous generations did. They don't wear it as an identity. They just quietly factor it in. They grew up watching brands get exposed, celebrities get cancelled, and governments fail in real time on their time. Authenticity isn't a value for Gen Z. It's a survival skill. They can detect inauthenticity faster than any generation ever studied, and they respond to it by simply disengaging. This is why traditional marketing collapsed trying to reach them. You can't sell Gen Z a lifestyle. They've already seen behind the curtain. But here's the paradox that confuses everyone. Despite that deep skepticism, Gen Z is also the most openly idealistic generation in decades. They march for climate. They organize online. They push back on inequality with a kind of moral urgency that hasn't been seen since the 1960s. How do you hold radical cynicism and radical idealism at the same time? Because they had to. When you grow up watching institutions fail, but also watching grassroots movements win, the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, online communities rallying around causes overnight, you learn that the system is broken and that collective action still matters. Both things are true simultaneously. Researchers describe Gen Z as having a very high tolerance for cognitive dissonance, the ability to hold two conflicting truths without needing to resolve them. That's not weakness. That's a sophisticated adaptation to a genuinely contradictory world. Now, let's talk about mental health. Because nobody has been more transparent about it. Gen Z didn't invent anxiety. They didn't invent depression. But they were the first generation to talk about it openly, normalize it publicly, and demand that workplaces and schools treat it seriously. A 2018 American Psychological Association survey found that Gen Z was the most likely of any generation to report poor mental health, and the most likely to seek help for it. Older generations look at this and say they're weak. What's actually happening is they rejected the emotional suppression that destroyed their parents and grandparents quietly from the inside. They chose visibility over stoicism. That's not fragility. That's a different kind of toughness. But that visibility comes with a cost. Gen Z grew up with their identities documented in real time. Every phase, every opinion, every mistake, potentially permanent, potentially public. This created something psychologists call context collapse, where a post made for friends can instantly reach strangers, employers, or enemies. They learned early that your digital self has consequences your physical self can't always control. So many of them developed multiple digital personas, careful audience segmentation, and an almost instinctive awareness of how information travels. They're not over, they're performing layers, giving you just enough to seem authentic while keeping the real self carefully protected. And then came March 2020. COVID didn't just disrupt Gen Z's schooling. It hit during the exact developmental window, ages 8 to 22, when identity formation, social bonding, and the transition to independence are at their most critical. The pandemic didn't pause their development. It reshaped it. They learned to build community remotely, to find belonging in Discord servers and niche Reddit threads and group chats at 2 a.m. They became experts at maintaining intimacy across distance. And when the world reopened, many of them found in-person socializing genuinely harder, not because they're antisocial, but because their social nervous systems had been calibrated for a different kind of connection. Here's what's fascinating about Gen Z at work. They baffled managers immediately. They ask why. Not to be difficult, because they need meaning as a prerequisite for engagement. They won't quietly grind for a company they don't believe in. They've watched that story end badly too many times. They will, however, work with extraordinary intensity for something they believe matters, which is why Gen Z entrepreneurship and passion work rates are among the highest ever recorded. In their age group, they don't want work-life balance. They want work-life integration, a life where what they do and who they are aren't too separate. Warring things, the deepest truth about Gen Z is this. They were handed a world on fire, climate change, political polarization, a pandemic, an economic ladder with missing rungs, and instead of pretending it wasn't burning, they said so, out loud, in public, to the discomfort of every generation that came before them. They are not the problem. They are the most honest diagnosis of the problems that were already there. Generation Z grew up in the gap between the world their parents promised and the world that actually showed up. And unlike generations before them, they refused to pretend the gap wasn't there. Maybe that's the most Gen Z thing of all. Looking directly at the thing everyone else agreed to look away from, and saying, Clearly, without flinching, I see it, and it matters. If this made you think differently, subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, hit that join button. I'd genuinely appreciate it.